Welcome to the latest episode of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. Back in November, NASCAR President Steve Phelps met with the media in Phoenix and gave his State of the Sport address. During that conversation, Phelps said there would be continued schedule variation in 2024. Fast forward to this past weekend at Sonoma and Fox's last NASCAR Cup Series broadcast for the 2023 season. Phelps sat down with Fox's Chris Myers and offered his thoughts on a couple of specific schedule-related topics, including the return of the Clash at the Coliseum and the continuation of racing on the Bristol dirt on Easter. Here's what he had to say.
We assume that the Clash is back at the LA Coliseum next year.
I think the Clash, as an exhibition event, did exactly what we wanted to do. We had 3/4 of the people who bought tickets in the first 2 years had never been to a NASCAR
First
race.
time NASCAR.
And I think, and that's, to me, that's how you build new fans, right? You have to bring it to them. We're trying to go where the fans want to go. We need sellouts and we need great racing.
The Bristol Easter dirt race. Do you like racing on Easter evening? Fans have spoken. Do you like the dirt? And maybe is there a dirt race somewhere else other than Bristol?
If the NFL can own Thanksgiving and the NBA can own Christmas, can we have a single race on Easter? I think the answer is yes. Whether it's at Bristol and whether it's on dirt, I don't know. But I think there's an opportunity for continued racing on Easter Sunday.
By the sounds of it, the Clash had a purpose and did its job. Sounds like it might be going elsewhere. Also sounds like the Bristol dirt might also be a thing of the past. But interestingly, one thing that won't be changing is the Easter date. Phelps made it clear that NASCAR is trying to replicate the NFL and its owning of Thanksgiving and the NBA owning Christmas. That's fair, but if you go back and look, NBA players have been complaining about playing on Christmas for years. That hasn't changed it from happening. In other words, the drivers and teams can bark all they want about racing on Easter, but it doesn't sound like that will stop it from happening going forward. Our next story also revolves around something the sanctioning body had to say and more specifically show this past weekend at Sonoma. For years, fans, drivers, and teams have called for NASCAR to be more transparent. One of the ways Denny Hamlin and Dale Jr. mentioned earlier this season on their podcast would be with the sanctioning body, which has been handing out penalties like candies these days, to show those confiscated illegal parts for everyone to see, as had been done in the past. This past weekend, NASCAR did just that by displaying the counterfeit part produced and used on Chase Briscoe's number 14 car that earned the Stewart-Haas racing team the biggest punishment so far, an L3 penalty which resulted in a loss of driver and owner's points and a fine and suspension of crew chief John Klossmeyer. But it wasn't just out on some table for others to casually inspect and not understand what they were looking at. Instead, one NASCAR official walked reporters through the details of the part, comparing it to the approved single-source supplier part, highlighting the differences between the two, and even showing how the part didn't fit. But the most interesting thing to come out of the show and tell session was how the official admitted that NASCAR has specific markings on the original parts to keep them identifiable, and the teams don't know what those markings on the parts are. Very interesting stuff. And the game of cat and mouse between NASCAR and the teams continues. Speaking of cheating, not sure if you saw it, but we put out a shorts video on Sunday that featured Kyle Busch talking about NASCAR show and tell and how he liked that officials are now showing the confiscated, cheated up parts. But he also said that if you took 15 cars back to the R&D center for post-race inspection, officials would find problems on 14 of them because everyone is trying to see what they can get away with. That was just one interesting remark Busch said during Saturday's meeting with the media. The other came when the two-time Cup Series champion was asked about safety in the next-gen car on the heels of NASCAR's response recently to the big impact between Kyle Larson and Ryan Preece at Talladega and how they're trying to strengthen the passenger side of the car, which was badly deformed in the number 5 car. Busch, in typical Busch fashion, presented some interesting thoughts and questioned the sanctioning body's decisions.
We need it to withstand big hits and hits like that and whatnot, but you know, I feel like we keep adding material and keep adding weight and keep making these things heavier. You know, we used to run 3,400 pound cars, now we're like 3,600 pound cars. So what's the limit? What's the level of how heavy is too heavy? So you know, there's a few, just talking to some of the engineers that I've spoken to, like there's a few areas of the car that are really, really, really stiff and don't have any sort of crush zone like the old car used to, and that's why those bars broke. And so we didn't look at any of that. We didn't cut any stuff out to soften up the frame rail, for instance, to let the frame rail flex. All we did was add stiffeners to make it even heavier and stiffer. So again, I'm not a genius, but at some point we all have to reimagine some things.
Based on what Phelps said on Sunday, NASCAR is reimagining the schedule. Hopefully, as Busch suggested, the sanctioning body will do something similar in addressing safety issues in the future. Let me know what you think about Busch's comments on the heavier car and reimagining things. And I'm really curious to hear what you think about NASCAR showing the illegal parts and being more transparent and getting tricky with specific markings on the original parts. And lastly, let me know what you think about the schedule. Do you like NASCAR owning Easter? All right, guys, thanks as always for checking out our latest video. Please be sure and let your NASCAR buddies know what we're doing here at Beatin' and Bangin'. And if you'd like to read more articles like this video, check out my written content on sportscasting.com. There's a link in the description. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next video, and have a great rest of your day.